Good morning, everyone. It is Wednesday, June the 17th, 2020. It is currently 9:26 a.m. Central Time. Now, before I say anything else, I need to stop and I need to make sure everyone understands that what we are about to discuss is of a very sensitive nature. To be honest with you, I don't feel comfortable even talking about this. It's disgusting. It's horrible. I can't believe. We're going to be dealing with things related, obviously, to racism. We're going to be dealing with things that happened in the past. I'm going to be trying to speak of it, trying to understand how it could have happened in the past, what we can learn from it in the present, how do we move on. But we're going to be dealing with, a very uncomfortable situation that involves a very, 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 very messed up word. And that is obviously a word that sometimes is used to refer to people of color that starts with an N. All right. That's as close as I can say. I don't want to even say it, but here's the situation. I can't, because it's uncomfortable. Just because something is uncomfortable doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it. Just because something is unpleasant doesn't mean we shouldn't take some time to look at it in the face and say, this is what occurred. This is what happened. And I think we're going to have to do that. So I just want you to understand, I'm going to try to approach this with as much sensitivity as I can, but I have to be able to explain exactly what seems to have happened in history. I'm going to try to inform you. I'm going to try to offer some thoughts. I have no desire to offend anyone. Well, I have a desire that we all should be offended by what happened in the past. I don't want to look at what happens in the past and then try to be sensational in the use of words just to shock people because that's not the goal. The goal is I want us to be offended by what has happened in history, and hopefully that will motivate us to look at ourselves. I want every person to look at themselves, to really think about this. And I know people from different racial backgrounds may react to this there may be some very different reactions to this. Look, I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't even know what to say. I don't even know what kind of warning to offer, because when I was sent this yesterday, I had a hard time. I had a hard time processing it. I did some research to ensure that I thought things were historically accurate. And the more I read, the more images I saw, the more upset I got. The artwork, the cover work for this podcast episode, that seems to be a legitimate photograph from a brochure by a specific group that was present in the 1940s. And that brochure is promoting something for a camp for children, for young people, and it's offensive. It's offensive to look at, but we need to see it. Again, this is the thing. Just ignoring history, erasing history, deleting history doesn't change that it actually took place. We need to see it. We need to know exactly what happened, and we need to be confronted with it. I've talked about in the past that, in my public education, I went to a public school. And I hated, most everything about the public school experience. But the one thing I've mentioned before is how very certain things in history I just never heard about, like the Tulsa race riots and the Tulsa race massacre that occurred in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I never even learned about that. And I went to school here in Texas, obviously not that far from Oklahoma. And it's like certain things that happen in regards to racism and certain things that happened, I got very little education about it. And I needed, well, most of my education I received in regards to racism and slavery and civil rights, I received from my mother giving me big, thick books to read in regards to that because she hated racism and wanted me to understand the history and did not want me to ever repeat it or hold to any of those ideologies. So when I find out there's certain things happened in the past that I wasn't aware of, sometimes it's shocking, but we have to look at it. We can't ignore it. Again, we can't just delete history. We need to learn the lessons from it. So the goal here is to try to learn the goal here is to be confronted with the reality of the past and for us to then stop and look at ourselves in the present. All right, I think that's a good way of studying it. The goal for this podcast episode is for us to be confronted with the reality of the past so that we will all stop and look at ourselves in the present and ask ourselves some very difficult questions. And I hope I can accomplish something with this. So let's start with what happened yesterday. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday evening. It may have been late yesterday afternoon. I received a message. Let me pull up the message here. And I'm just going to read it. Here we go. This is the message I received yesterday. In the early 1900s, one of the most popular games at the local fair was stop right there, in baby. And that in is obviously a racist term, all right? Hit the in baby. I cannot say the word. I would not say the word, but you know what I am referring to. Hit the in baby, a word used sometimes to refer to African Americans, a term sometimes used to refer to black people, all right? Hit the in baby. Now, when I first read that first sentence, I was like, wait, okay, what? So in the early 1900s, one of the most popular games at a local fair was Hit the In Baby. And I'm like, okay, well, it can't be what that sounds like. There's just no way. And I can't believe they would even use that word. But in the early 1900s, I'm not too shocked that they would use that word. But there's no way this can be what that sounds like. So I continue to read. These fairs would set up a black baby or toddler, and white people would pay money for baseballs to throw at the in baby as hard as they could. The favorite highlight of playing this game was when the black mother was forced to breastfeed her baby and fill them so that when the person throwing the baseball hit the baby's stomach, they would throw up all their mother's milk. The crowd would cheer at the hit to the stomach of the baby, and the person would get a prize. Many people would just get done worshiping Jesus at their church and then head over to the fair to hit the in baby. Now, if you look at the cover, the artwork that I'm using for this podcast episode, you'll see kind of a picture of this, and it supposedly comes from a brochure, and I'm going to read about that in a minute. And the word is there. The word is there so that you know exactly what I'm referring to. When I read that, I just kind of stopped and like, okay, wait a minute. There's no way. And then I started thinking, okay, maybe I've heard of this. Then I'm thinking, well, maybe I don't think I've heard of this. I'm like, even I've heard of this, it's still horrible. Like, what is going on? So obviously I had to do a little bit of checking to see if there was any validity to this, to do any, like, okay, what is going on? So the first thing I came across is an article that describes what is known as African Dodger. African Dodger. Now, come to find out, African Dodger is what I guess this game was referred to. But it had other names. African Dodger, I don't know which name was the most popular, which name was used most frequently. I don't think I can determine that, but it looks like the name went with three names. African Dodger, and I'm just going to spell the word out, CRISPR, C-O-O-N, I'm not even going to read it, hit the C-O-O-N, or hit the N baby. So it was known by three names: African Dodger, hit the C-O-O-N, or hit the N baby. This was a carnival game played in the United States in which an African-American man would stick his head through a canvas curtain and attempt to dodge objects such as eggs or baseballs thrown at him by players. Now, this one does not describe the use of an actual baby. This refers to a man, all right? So I don't know if the baby thing is 100% accurate, but so just stay with me. That's what I received, and this is the first thing I found trying to prove or disprove all of this. Again, the name of the game, African Dodger, or hit the C-O-O-N, or hit the N baby. It was a carnival game played in the United States in which an African-American man would stick his head through a canvas curtain and attempt to dodge objects such as eggs or baseballs thrown at him by players. It was popular in the late 19th and early 20th century, despite the obvious brutality of hitting a black person in the head with baseballs. The target often suffered serious injuries. The game was played as early as the 1880s and as late as the 1950s. Smaller kit-based versions of the game was also so to be played at home. However, African Americans continue to be used for similar games, with Popular Mechanics noting in 1910 that African Dodger had become too old and commonplace and was being replaced with dunk tanks, in which an African American would fall into a tank of water when a target was hit with a ball. The illustration accompanying the article shows a game labeled Drop. This is insane. Again, this was in Popular Mechanics. Drop the chocolate drop. And it captioned, amusing to all but the victim. Now, supposedly, African Dodger has appeared in comic strips and cartoons, including Donald Duck. Now, I don't know. Supposedly, this game was described in a 1973 novel called Breakfast of Champions. Whew. All right. Now, that at least doesn't have a baby being hit, but it has a human being being hit. So I needed to do a little bit more verification. So I did some continued searching, and I found this. Was a violently racist carnival game once popular in America? In the not-so-distant past, white carnival goers threw eggs or balls at African Americans in a game popularly known as Hit the N Baby. All right. This article was published in February of 2018. All right. Hit the N Baby was once a popular attraction at fairgrounds in the United States. All right. This is what they have to say. The history of the United States is both scarred and partly defined by racism and violence, a legacy with almost endlessly litany of horrific incidents and phenomena. All right, and that's, I mean, we can't deny that. All right, I mean, I don't care what people have to say. The history of the United States is scarred and defined by a lot of racism and violence, a legacy with almost an endless litany of horrific incidents. That's just a fact. And the more you dig into it, the more you see, the more you're confronted with it. I remember, again, my mom, of all the things happened bad in my family, my mom was so adamant about, racism is wrong. And she, again, she gave me the book Roots. She was the one who very much let me understand about the civil rights. And she would give me books or different things. So I would see like how it would work. Like, an African-American could not use the same entrance as a white person, couldn't use the same water fountain, all of these things. And just to see the images, I would always sit there. When I would see the images and just try to wrap my mind around it, thinking, okay, how And this is, and I don't know if you've ever thought this way, but I would do this even as a young person. I would constantly ask myself, what would I have done if I lived in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, if I would have lived in the 1880s, if I lived at that time with the social construct, because I would have been, if I would have been white, living in a social construct of living in Texas or wherever, I would have been, seeing the widespread, rampant, segregation, racism, all these people being treated as less than human, how would I have responded? And I want to believe that I would have responded in a way that would have stood against the majority, would have condemned the majority, and I would have treated people of color with respect, with dignity. I would have understood that they were people created in the image of God, and I would have risked my life. I hope I would have risked my life to stand with them, to stand by them, to stand up for them, and to do everything I could as a white person to overthrow the racist structure that was in society. I want to believe that with all of my heart, but I don't know what I would have done in that situation. The one thing I can take with me is my constant willingness now to stand against the majority. I don't care if it's the Christian majority. I don't care who it is. I'm always willing to stand against the majority, and I've never been willing to go along with the crowd. Ever, ever, ever. Even with little things. When I was in the public school system, I didn't care what we were doing. If everyone in school says, well, you have to go to the pep rally, I'm not going. You have to cheer for our team, I'm not cheering for our team. I constantly would do the opposite of what the majority told me to do. I always stood against the majority. So I'm hoping that mentality, if I possess that in a previous life, right? If I was to go back and that if I would have been born at another time, I wish that would be with me. But so whenever I see images and hear about these kinds of things, I always wonder, how would I have responded? How would I have handled it? And I want to think the best, but it's hard to believe a society where a popular game at a fair is to throw objects at an African-American male. Or at least in the one post I got, a baby. I haven't been able to confirm that so far in what I have, but we'll go through this. All right. So there's no way to deny that those things happened in our country. The question is, how would we have responded? I'm not even, and I think it's a question every white person has to ask themselves. We can stand there now and say, I'm against it, but what would you have done at that particular time? And the reason that question is so important is because I think that question reveals how well you are at standing against the crowd, how well you are going against peer pressure, how well you're willing to stand. And I know some people say, well, no, if I lived back then, I would have done this and I would have done that. You wouldn't able to stand against the crowd. And when you went to high school, you didn't want to, if the crowd said you wear this, you wore what they told you to wear, you acted like them, and don't act like you didn't. Because so many people act like that they would go back then and take a stand. They cave to peer pressure every time it's around. They never want to stand out. They don't ever want to look like the odd man out. They don't want to be weird, and they didn't want the crowd laughing at them. Well, then you wouldn't have taken a stand then. If you can't take a stand against peer pressure and you cave every time the majority tells you to do something, then you would have caved back then. Right? So, but I think it's a question we have to ask ourselves because it says a lot. All right, so here we go. In February 2018, thousands of Americans were confronted, some for the first time, with the image of a once popular fairground game with an extremely offensive name. And you can see what they were confronted with in February of 2018 because I've got the image for the artwork here. It shows a white kid holding, it looks like a baseball, throwing at something. You can't tell. It does look like that. Obviously, it's not a baby. It looks like there's like a big circle. So I'm assuming someone's head is supposed to be sticking through it. There's all these kids standing around. It's absolutely horrific. It's absolutely frightening to see. These are children. standing there. And obviously the idea is that this kid is throwing a baseball at a human being whose head's stuck through this circle, who's an African American. The image is authentic. It shows a 1942 YMCA brochure. The image seems to be authentic and shows a 1942 YMCA brochure, which YMCA, Young Men's Christian Association. That's when I lost it. That's when I almost just had, that's it. That's when I'm just done. I'm done. A Christian organization published a brochure showing an image that literally says, hit the N baby, with showing young white kids throwing one young white boy, and there's white kids standing around him, throwing a baseball at what would have been a human being. Now, Christians love to argue that we've got morality on our side. Well, what in the world was going on then? The image is authentic, shows a 1942 YMCA brochure for camp, and I'm just going to spell the name of it, Minikani, Minikani, all right? It was a children's summer camp in Wisconsin. Hit the N baby, also known as the Black Dodger, okay, which I confirmed in another source, or hit the COON, which we also confirmed in another source, was a common fairground game in which players hurled objects, usually eggs or baseballs, at African American people serving as human targets. According to the Jim Crow Museum at Ferris State University, it sounds like a common carnival target game, but there was one unsettling part of the game. Namely, the game's target was a real, live human being. Now, this is the way the Ferris State University Jim Crow Museum stated it, a Negro human being. And that's in quotes. Man. In our research of newspaper archives, we found evidence of the games being staged as early as 1880 and recently as the 1950s. In several instances, the stand received top billing in newspaper bulletins promoting upcoming carnivals and fairs, along with the shooting gallery and fish pond. In July 1948, a soldiers' reunion and homecoming held in the public square in Brownstown, Indiana, was advertised in the Jackson County Banner with the exhortation, "Make this big week your vacation time. Bring the family, meet old friends, hit the N babies, plural, eat hot dogs, and join the fun." Hey, a soldiers' reunion, homecoming. Hey, let's make this a great vacation. Come on down and hit the N babies. Woohoo! Yeah, let's all do that. And again, this happened here in the United States of America. Home of the brave, land of the free. Yeah. Real bravery. No one could stand up to it. Where were the white people saying, that's a human being? Where was the church? Hey, that's a human being created in the image of God. We cannot do this. I will not allow this. I'm trying to be calm. In November 1935, the Iowa newspaper Lake Park News recounted a recent successful high school carnival which featured a musical show and a thrilling athletic event, touting that after the show, the crowd enjoyed themselves in visiting various booths or trying to wring a duck's neck and a tank of water or hit the N baby. From the St. Petersburg Times gives a particularly disturbing sense of the popularity of the game, describing how some residents of St. Petersburg, Florida, celebrated Labor Day in 1925. All right, here we go. Here's how it described it. Who can hit the N word? Buy 3 chances to hit the N word. With all the vigor of a professional ballyhoo man, the laborer drew the crowd to the side attraction at the Labor Day celebration at Waterfront Park Monday afternoon. A grinning N boy, his head stuck through the opening of a sheet, awaited the battery of eggs thrown at him by the majority of St. Petersburg Star pitchers. From the width of his grin, he enjoyed it almost as much as the crowd. One time where the goat wasn't a goat, for only a few of the eggs found their mark. All right, now this is eggs. Again, they try to act like the African-American enjoyed it. Now, again, so far, none of the research has anything about an actual baby being hit or drinking milk and then throwing it up. I haven't found any historical information to verify what was sent to me. But, I mean, it's still bad enough. They go on in the paper, this is again from 1925, describing everything that happened on Labor Day. They say, take it easy, go slow, take your time. 1, 2, gone, 3. Try again. Thus the man in charge, as contestant after contestant, tried his luck. His, as the woman only looked on and laughed at the men's attempts. One boy was determined, and amid the jeers of the crowd, took 3 tries, missing them all until his last. The crowd grew larger and larger until the ball game started, when it rapidly dwindled. The Tampa St. Petersburg game being more of an attraction than even Hit the N Baby. Now, the baseball game was, more popular than Hit the N Baby. As could be expected, injuries resulting from the game were common, especially when baseballs were used instead of eggs. In 1887, the New York Sun recounted a bad day at the Westchester County Fair by noting that everything seemed to go wrong. The African Dodger was disabled. A very hard ball had explored a very soft region of his cranium, and he was laid up for repairs. The Sun also reported with no apparent concern for the injured man that another African-American was procured to do the African Dodgers act. Based on newspaper reports, it appears that some African Americans may have been killed during the course of the games. In 1908, for example, an African Dodger named William White was the target of carnival goers in Hanover, Pennsylvania, where a squad of baseball players took turns throwing hard balls at his head. White, according to the Philadelphia Record, was subject to a multitude of balls, but took the punishment courageously. Almost as an afterthought, the Record observed later in the piece that he was compelled to retire soon after with internal injuries which may prove fatal. Notwithstanding the horrific brutality of the game, we did not find any evidence of actual infants being used as targets, despite what the name of the game suggests. All right? So they don't... There's no evidence of babies actually being used. So that's, I guess we can take, do we take any solace in that? I don't know. Wow. And I could go on and read more. There's just, man. There's a video, I guess, put together by the Jim Crow Museum. They may have just shows a lot of images about the game. I don't know if, obviously from back then, I don't think they have any actual video of the game being taking place. But they probably have a collage of pictures in a video form where they show images from papers and everything about it. That's from the Jim Crow Museum. You possibly could look that up on YouTube to see the images if you care to see them. So what do we do with this? Well, let's at least establish this. It's a fact that African Americans were used, typically African American men, it seems, and African American boys, that seems to be accurate, were used as targets for people to throw eggs, baseballs. Those seem to be the two objects. I did find an image of a baseball that was used in one of these games, and on the baseball game, it says African Dodger. This was the ball used for the African Dodger game. I don't know if the African Dodger name was the more popular one. It seems that typically the game was referred to as Hit the N Baby. I think that seems to be the more popular usage of the name. It's how it was used in advertisements, how it was used in newspapers. So there seems to be no way to deny that happened. Now, I know what a lot of white people do. Well, a lot of bad things happen to a lot of people. Let's just move on. Let's try to just stop and deal with this from a number of perspectives, okay? And I wrote down a few things in my notebook when I first saw this, just some initial thoughts, and I'm going to throw these out there. And I know that let's say this, because whenever I look at these issues, I always try to break them down. I'll try to look at anything from a lot of different perspectives, offering a lot of different layers of thought. Some people want me to be just much more like one perspective and that's it. But I really try to dig in and try to look under and try to look at this from as deeply as we can and see that what we can learn from it. So what I want us to do is I want us to be confronted with the reality of this horrible past, be confronted with this reality that literally white people would go to a fair, even children, take baseballs and eggs and throw them at another human being, an African American. And they thought it was fun. They thought it was a great time. And it was even promoted by the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association. So I want us to be confronted with the reality of the past so that we then have to stop and look at ourselves in the present. What can we take from this? What can we learn from this? Well, the first question, I only wrote down when I started doing my research and I had my notebook, I just wrote down one word. How? How? How can that happen? How can that occur? How did it happen? And I've always struggled with it. Again, whenever I would see images of anything happening in the past, I would always ask myself, what would I do? Because I've always been bothered by that fact. Like, I've never been put in that kind of situation, but what would I do? I hope I would take a stand against it. I hope I would have been there, standing there, grabbing the baseballs, throwing them back at the little white kids and throwing them back at the white people, saying, you're all a bunch of disgusting, racist bigots. This is horrible. I don't know. I hope I would have, even if I got arrested and beat up and killed, hopefully I would have been willing to risk my life. I hope I would have been willing to risk my life, even if I could just have found a way to protect one African American in that game. I know I couldn't have stopped the game, but even if it cost me my life, I hope I would have been willing to give my life. I hope. But obviously others were not. So how did they get there? How did it happen? And I have these same, when I see images of Nazi Germany and I see what was happening to the Jews, I was like, how did they get there? How did it happen? How could so many people just go along with it? And it's this idea of, I hate the concept with every ounce of my being. So this is what I did. Under the word how, I wrote two things down. All right. The first thing I wrote down was group think. Group think. This is the only, group think scares me to death. All right. Group think is when a certain way of thinking reaches, I don't know what the threshold is, but a certain level of acceptance happens. And once it reaches a certain level, it just becomes the automatic de facto way you think. And this is what you're supposed to do. This is how you're supposed to think. No one ever stops to ask, wait, why do we think that way? Wait, why do we do that? Everyone just then goes along because once you reach a certain percentage, it just becomes now the way you act. Again, I'll give you all kinds of examples from my own life of standing against groupthink, because I think one of the best places you encounter groupthink is in the public education system. Public education system, this is the way you have to do things. Let me give you an example. I'll start with my high school. I showed up the first day of high school, Gymnet High School here in West Texas, all right? That was going to be the first day of what would become 4 years of a living Hades, okay, a living oh man, that was horrible. Okay, so I won't even go into that. But first day I walk into school, we get there and immediately, because what they have all these seniors all over the place grabbing freshmen, That would have been me. I've been a freshman. Grabbing the freshmen, forcing them to do things like, it was just crazy. Like they were freshmen on the floor pushing a penny with their nose, like all of this, like they were just making them do all kinds of crazy stuff, right? And as soon as I walked through the front door, there was like a lobby there, and there was all these freshmen doing all of these things. And I walked in, and someone said, "Hey, freshman." And I'm like, "I'm not doing one thing you tell me to do. I'm not pushing a penny. I'm not participating in any of your reindeer games. I don't care what you do to me. I don't care how much I get beat up. You better back off. And if you come at me, I'm coming back at you." And I was only like, 5'2" and 80 pounds. So it's not like I was acting like that I was a big man on campus, because I was the small man on campus, and I got brutalized over and over and over, but I would not participate. I didn't care what it cost me. I was not going to participate, and I could not believe how many kids just walked in and just bowed to the pressure. Just bowed to the pressure to participate in all of this hazing nonsense. It made no, why? Why do you have to participate in that? No, you don't have to do that. But no, this is just the way it's done. Well, the way it's done is wrong. I'm not participating. So I took a stand. Well, this is how messed up it was in the school I went to. We had something called, this is literally what it was called, Slave Day. Literally what it was called. Now, remember, at this time, there were no African-American students. I don't think there had ever been an African-American student in our school. So they called it Slave Day. This is literally what happened. You're going to think I'm making this up, but I am not. You were instructed as a freshman that on a specific day you would show up to school and you had to wear a white T-shirt and a pair of jeans. All right? Now, in the gymnasium, all the people are sitting up in the bleachers, right? And then in the middle of the gymnasium is a stand, and you would come and walk, and when they called your name, you would crawl up on this stand, and you stood on this stand in front of the school. And then the students would bid on you to purchase you as their slave. I am not making this up. Called Slave Day, then they owned you. Now, it was supposed to be originally like, a little bit of fun, make you carry their books and just little things like that. I didn't care what it was. I wasn't going to carry your books. I was not going to participate in the reindeer. I'm like, I am not going to do this. And I was basically told, if you don't do this, you're going to die. I was basically threatened death. And I guess I was the first person in the history of the school to not participate. And the teachers came and called me in, and I was called into a conference with all the teachers, and they said, these are the exact words, "We cannot guarantee your safety if you don't participate." So this is what they promised me. If I would participate, they promised and guaranteed that they would purchase me, and they would make me do something kind of fun and stupid and silly. So I went ahead and did it. My brother told them, I won't repeat what my brother said. It was filled with a lot of expletives. Okay, I won't go with what he said. He did not. And then he ended up, he got attacked by, it got ugly. His safety, he almost did not make it. All right, that's bad. Now, things got so horrible for Slave Day. One female who was purchased was taken to the ag building, right? They put a noose around her neck and covered her hair with cow dung and cow urine. And then they basically almost hung her, and she ended up having to go to the hospital. This all occurred at a public high school, something called Slave Day. Now, I think they ultimately finally, once African-American students came in, and then, someone at some point stood against it. It still happens, I guess. I don't know if it still happens. They changed the name of it. It's not Slave Day. I don't know what they finally did, but here were adults, principal, teachers, allowing and supporting this to go on. How could one reach that? Like, what rational person would let this happen in a public school? Groupthink. It's just, that's the way it goes. And it starts with the little small things. Hey, you're in this school. I remember when I was in junior high, I wasn't playing basketball that year. I can't remember why. I think I had transferred in from another school late. I don't remember all the details that happened back then. But our school was going to be playing another school, and we were forced to go to the game. It was during the day, and I decided to cheer for the other school. Next thing you know, I'm getting in trouble. How can I get in trouble? Why? Who made the rule that I have to cheer for my school? I don't have to cheer for it. So I would always take a stand against groupthink, but I would always see the consequences of going against the majority always cost you. So how could human beings in the 1940s, or start from the 1880s to the 1950s, engage in a game where another human being is being targeted with eggs and baseballs, all for entertainment? How could that happen? And it's happening primarily because of the race of his skin. What twisted minds could let that happen? Where were the people standing against it? Where were the churches protesting it? Where was someone saying this is wrong? Now, again, all of the history we have, there may have been those who were protesting against it. Maybe there was. I'm hoping, I'm praying, I'm pleading that there was, and maybe at some point in my further research, I will find it. But for the YMCA to be doing that is insane. That's groupthink. Now, that's one thing we can learn from the past. We've got to beware of groupthink today. And you see it all, like here's the way you're supposed to think. If you're a Christian, you're supposed to, if you're a Christian here in West Texas, here's the way you're supposed to think. You're supposed to be for, pro-gun. You're supposed to be this. You're supposed to be that. Who says I have to be that? And then what we'll do is we'll take groupthink, somehow conform groupthink to the scriptures, say scriptures support groupthink, and then we just are in a circle where our presuppositions get reconfirmed because we see our presupposition in everything that we look at. It's just a crazy thing. Groupthink, that's the only other way I can explain what happened. Happened in Nazi Germany, happened at different times in history. Just the majority of people think that way. And it's always in history the people who go, I don't think we're right. And they're the ones who initially get shot down and attacked and called crazy. We have to question the group think. Now, when I say question the group think, I'm not saying then you slide off into the world of logical fallacies and insanity. You question things, but you do so in a logical way where you're looking for facts and information. Okay, not just to question everything just so that you can look like you're insane. That's going too far the other direction. But the only thing I could think of was groupthink. Nobody there ever stopped to question the majority. Do you have a better explanation? And when I say groupthink, obviously groupthink would have included racism, because racism was the way they treated the other race, the way they viewed African Americans. They viewed them as less than human beings. They viewed them as an animal. They didn't view them. And what's even bizarre? Hopefully you would never play a game like that with an animal. Now, in one of those newspaper articles, they said try to wring the neck of a duck. Now, I don't know if that was an actual duck where someone tried to grab it and then tried to wring its neck underwater. If that's the case, then that even demonstrates the way they treated animals. So maybe they were treating the African Americans because they believed the African Americans to be less than human. They treated them just like they treated any other animals. And maybe there were all kinds of horrible games and of animal cruelty. It would be interesting to know how animals were treated at that time at fairs in the 1880s and the 1940s and the 1950s. I mean, man, yeah, that could say a lot, but it's still groupthink. It's racism, but it's racism because that's the way the group thought. I am acknowledging racism was there. I'm acknowledging bigotry was there, but I'm trying to go deeper into how did you get there? It's groupthink. This is the way everyone thinks about African Americans, so we just go along with it. Number 2. Now, this one will be controversial, and I know I'm going to get some emails on this one, but that's okay. I'm going to argue that part of the problem in the 1880s and the 1940s and the 1950s I know I'm going to get, especially people who are not Christians are going to get really mad at me at this, but that's okay. I'm going to argue, I'm going to throw out a theory that part of the problem in the way African Americans were treated, in large part, had to do with evolutionary theory. Now, if you do not believe me, go find the entire set. I don't remember how many novels there are in the set, but the Tarzan novels, right? From the very first novel all the way through. Read those novels and read it with a pencil or a marker and mark everything it says and how it speaks of African Americans. It basically speaks of African Americans or Africans or blacks, okay? Because in many cases the books are taking place on the continent of Africa. So not African Americans, so Africans, blacks. It treats them and speaks of them as less than human. As they're not as evolved as white man. White man was highly evolved, but the blacks were this less involved between ape and man kind of creature. They're almost spoken of in a non-human, animalistic way, almost akin to the apes and the gorillas. Very much along that line. Like that's where they belong. Now, I don't know how widespread. Well, I know that the Tarzan novels were extremely popular, and I've read them, and I was shocked by the way Africans and blacks were portrayed in the books. And I'm like, but it was very much traced back and connected to evolutionary thought. It's right there in the novels. So if the evolutionary idea at the time were that blacks were not as evolved, that they were basically animals, and that was a prevalent, you got groupthink going on, but I wonder how much evolutionary thought had to come to play in this. If evolutionary thought is survival of the fittest, some are more highly evolved, and because they're more highly evolved, then everything under them is used for the advancement of the more highly evolved species. The higher evolved species use the lower evolved species for their, they use the lower ones for their own advantage and for them to move forward. I mean, got to understand, evolutionary thought does not have a morality built into it. It's not a moral system. The system is the survival of the fittest. Kill the weak. Use the weak for your species to evolve and move forward. Some things need to be killed off and murdered and get done away with if it's holding back the evolutionary process. Some things have to go. Some things are just mutations and are weak and must be discarded so that evolution can continue forward. Evolution doesn't care about morality. Evolution doesn't believe in any sanctity of any species. Everything is just biologically, there's just this process that just started and it's underway. There's no God. There's no morality in it. It's just a biological process and one gets rid of the other. You cannot tell me that evolutionary thought did not have some play in this. Now, let's be fair. Christians were racist and bigots, and Christians supported slavery. Not all Christians, but there were those who did. There were the YMCA putting out a brochure with this in it. But evolutionary thought, and this is very important, the philosophical systems of the world are just as effective in changing the way Christians think as Christian thought is and affecting the way Christians think. Just because a philosophical system is very prevalent in the world, and you say, well, the church rejects it, you can reject the philosophical system and still be influenced by it. You reject it in word, you reject it in doctrine, but you end up accepting it in thought and in practice. I'm going to argue evolutionary thought has to take it has to bear some responsibility. It's like evolutionary thought is never called to blame for any of this. It's like, well, it was all Christians' fault. It was all religion's fault. Evolutionary thought changed the whole dynamic in the way you looked at everything. There isn't no God. There isn't no creator. And that some races are not as highly evolved as other races. I wish when evolution was taught Evolution needs to be taught as a scientific theory. Some may even argue a scientific fact, but you have to then bring in the ethical, moral, and societal consequences of that thought. No thought exists in a vacuum. You can't sit and tell everyone, hey, you're just evolved animals. There is no God. There is no transcendent purpose for why we're here. You just evolve and it's the survival of the fittest. You can't teach a theory that basically says you're an animal and then ignore the possible consequences of teaching such a scientific theory. You can't teach a theory saying that race over there is not as highly evolved as our race. We're the white people. We're highly evolved. The blacks are not highly evolved. You can't teach such a theory and then ignore the possible consequences that have occurred in history. People will when people teach religion, they want to bring up everything that look at the consequences of religion. Look at all the wars. Look at all the divisions. Everyone wants all of the negative consequences of religion to be taught. But nobody ever wants to deal with the possible negative consequences of evolutionary thought. Now, I don't know if it's always easy to say cause and effect, but man, something was going on to treat those people as less than human. I mean, there's no way, if they saw them as fully human, I don't think they would have been able to do that. The same thing happened with the Native Americans, treated as savages, as less than human, as almost an animalistic idea, like an animal. And I just think it's interesting that one newspaper talked about wring the neck of a duck. I don't know exactly what that game was, but if it's what it sounds like, then you're going to have people paying so they can grab a duck and try to wring its neck. Well, that sounds horrible, cruel, and disgusting. But right next to that is hit the end, baby, which is cruel and disgusting. One is the mistreatment of an animal for entertainment, which there's a lot of people who still, got no problem with that kind of thing. And the other one is the mistreatment of a human being created in the image of God. So those are the first things I wrote down. I wrote how. The second thing I wrote down was the church. The church. Where was the church? How did the YMCA get to this point? I cannot stress this enough. The church has always been and will always be vulnerable to cultural thinking. If you read the letter of 1 Corinthians, that's a letter written to a church that was located in a city, and the city was influencing the church more than the church was influencing the city. I repeated that phrase our entire time going through 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians was a church that reflected the thinking and the thought process of Corinth. It did not reflect the thinking process of born-again Christians, and that's why they were being reprimanded. The church can, look, it doesn't matter what's happening in culture. It doesn't matter if it's a conservative revolution and we're all pro-Trump and all of this. The church can buy right into a pro-conservative Republican groupthink, or the church can buy into a liberal, progressive, quote-unquote, woke groupthink. The church has always been in danger of that, because so many times what happens in the church is our thinking is not coming from the Bible. It's coming from society. In other words, if you were a church located in a racist society who treated blacks as less than human, and you had a fair game called Hit the End Baby, then you would go to church, and after church you would stop by the fair with your kids and hit the end baby, because you didn't think as Christians, you thought as the culture, because your church was located in a culture, and instead of being salt and light to the culture was the salt and the light to the church. That is a danger right now today. How many Christians talk about immigrants? How many Christians talk about illegal immigrants almost like they're less than human beings? All right, now I could talk a lot about that. The way people it's just insane the way Christians will think that way, because their thinking is not coming from the scriptures. The one foundational teaching in scripture is that all men are created in the image of God, and their lives have some there's a sanctity to the life. There's a sacredness to the life. And they should be treated that way. Now, others will argue, well, the Bible supports slavery. I understand that slavery is definitely recorded in the Bible. And it definitely speaks of that because, and I might make this very clear, the Bible the Bible basically had zero to say, especially in the New Testament, with trying to overthrow societal systems. It was about calling individuals to repent and believe in God and live out the Christian life. It wasn't a call to revolutionize and change the culture with political upheaval and changing laws. It never promoted that. Even though many Christians think it does, it doesn't. But where was the church? This is a warning sign. Look, we're being confronted with the past to look at ourselves in the present. When we look at ourselves in the present, what do we need to think about? We look ourselves in the present, and this is what we need to think about. We need to think about the power of groupthink. We need to think about the power of evolutionary thought in the history of racism and bigotry. We have to at least consider it. I think it's an area worthy of study. And then we have to ask the church, why does the church sometimes is such on the wrong side of societal issues? Because we get our thinking from every source other than the Bible. All right? And then one other thing I wrote down. How do we deal with the past? How do we deal with this? I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. I'm a white person, so what can I do? I mean, I don't know what to say. If you're an African American, even if you're not an African American, if you're black from any other country, okay, I don't know how you handle that. Here's my thought. Here's my thought process. And again, this is coming from a white person. So I can't speak to how people of different cultural and racial backgrounds, how you deal with it. But here's my perspective. And my perspective may be completely misguided, but here's my perspective. Whatever, I don't know all of my history. I don't know where my family, I know certain aspects of it, and some of that I can't even confirm. Like supposedly one of the first Hammocks who came here from England, came here, fell in love with a Native American girl, married the Native American girl. Next thing you know, the Queen from England is calling for the head of the first person from my family to come here, for his head to be taken and to be killed or to be arrested. I don't know all the details. I don't know everything that's happened to my family. I don't know. I know that here's what I know. Here's what I can say. This is I'm going to try to look at this from a theological perspective. Here's what I know. The history of mankind. The history of mankind is filled with injustice, with murder, with bigotry, with people being placed in bondage and slavery, with one society overcoming and putting another society into bondage and slavery and stealing their land and killing their people and murdering their kings. It's conquer or be conquered, kill or be killed, take or your land be taken. We have a history of it. We have wrongs that are done at a smaller level. We have wrongs that are done at a larger level, a national level. We have wrongs done by one neighbor versus another neighbor. We have races done. We have wrong done with people of the same race doing it to each other. We have people of one race doing it to another race. We have one gender doing it to another gender. We have the history of the world is filled with evil, with sin, with murder, with injustice, inequality. It's just filled with it. And that's never going away because there's something inherently wrong in all of us. And that is a sinful nature. Let me make sure it realize all of the inequality, all of the injustice, all of the wrong. It flows from a depravity inside of us. Listen, this is why a materialistic world is incapable of addressing these issues. A world without God, how do you say why is racism wrong? What makes it wrong? Who determines that it's wrong? Is there a transcendent value in one race over another race? Is there a transcendent value in all races? Like a materialistic world can't even answer all of this. So from a Christian perspective is this: we live in a world where wrong has taken place. It's taken place against Native Americans. It's taken place against people of different races, different colors. Just the history is filled with it. Now, what can you do? What can you do? Well, you can sit and allow the wrongs of the past to destroy your present. Or you can say the wrongs of the past were wrong. If there's any way to make those wrongs right in the present, it's our moral responsibility to make those wrongs right in the present. We do have a responsibility to do that. But I think we also have to do this. At some point, we have to move forward. We cannot allow the wrongs of the past to destroy us in the present. This is the only example I can offer from my perspective, okay? Because I'm not black, so I can't look at the things that's happened to the black race and then try to articulate how you should respond. I can only look at it from my perspective. I was raised in a family where so much went wrong that to write a book about it, people would not believe. The dysfunction, the abuse, the chaos, the insanity. I cannot even begin to tell you how messed up it all was. Now, 3 siblings. I have me and my real sister and my real brother. All right, so there's 3 of us. And then a step family came in, and I'm not even going to get involved in that insanity. All right, but at some point in my life, I did try to take a gun in my life and end up in a psychiatric hospital. But somewhere between my Christianity and the 8 weeks in that psychiatric hospital, I came to a very important conclusion. I cannot change one thing that happened in the past. I can't go back. I can't relive my childhood. I'm never going to get my childhood back. All the things my family took from me, I cannot get back. I cannot. All right? The nightmares and all the things that are associated with it, those sometimes still there, but I cannot go back and fix it. But you know what I can do? I can live today. You know what I can do? I can live tomorrow. And so I made a decision that I was not going to allow the past to define my present. I was not going to allow it the past to destroy me. They destroyed my past, but they were not going to control my present. So I was going to live my life moving forward. Now, sadly, my brother and sister were not able to do that. They live a life of bitterness, of anger, and it turned into substance abuse and addiction and destroyed their lives. My brother's doing pretty good now. My sister is just, hopefully she's better now, but she's reached beyond rock bottom at times because she can't get past it. And if you talk to her for 5 seconds, all she wants to talk about is all the wrongs that were done to us in the past. Look, there were wrongs done to your race. There's been wrongs done to all kinds of people. Don't allow whatever those people did to your race in the past to destroy your present, to destroy your future. You're not defined by that. Now, in some cases, listen, you still may encounter racism still exists. Things still happen. No matter what someone tries to do in your present, don't let them rob you of a future. Don't. Now, that doesn't mean we just ignore injustices in the present. I'm not saying ignore injustices in the present. I'm not saying ignore wrong policies. I'm not saying ignore that. I'm saying you can't let it destroy you. You can't let it define you. You can't let your life be filled with bitterness and hatred and anger and envy and jealousy and rage because it will simply destroy you. You've got to move forward. Now, that doesn't mean we ignore the past. We acknowledge the past exists, and we allow that to. We are confronted with the past so that we look at ourselves in the present. But as we look to ourselves in the present, we can say the one thing is I'm not going to allow what I just was confronted with in the past to mess up my present. I'm going to live my life. I'm going to pursue it. I'm going to take advantage of every second. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to accomplish something. So let me go through this again. These are the notes I just wrote down in my notebook. These are just initial thoughts. Number one, as we are confronted with the reality of this horrible game, and it's horrible and it's disgusting and it makes me mad. If we're going to be confronted with it, We have to stop and look at ourselves in the present, and we have to ask ourselves, how did that happen? And we need to be confronted in the present with the power of groupthink and be seeing how groupthink impacts us right now. We need to at least stop and consider how evolutionary thought and evolutionary theory contributed to some of these problems. Evolutionary thought and evolutionary theory is materialistic in nature. There is no God, so there is no transcendent morality. There is no sanctity in human life. We're just animals. There is no transcendent morality. Evolutionary thought is a materialistic philosophy that I think leaves you with no answers and no hopes and no solutions. Second, we're confronted with what happened in the past. We have to take the time to consider ourselves in the present, and the church needs to consider itself in the present. We have to be careful that we do not allow the church and that we don't allow ourselves as Christians to have our minds so messed up that we can't even see what's right in front of us from a biblical perspective. How people could walk from a church to a fair and pay for a baseball to throw at an African American, at a human being, is beyond my ability to comprehend. But Christians have done horrible things in the past because we are depraved and we are vulnerable to thinking as the culture, not thinking as the church. Right? Third thing we need to consider is, how do we deal with the past? How do we deal with the past? We need to be confronted with the reality of the past. But when we ask ourselves, how can we deal with the past and the present? Don't let it rob you. Don't let it cheat you. Don't let it destroy you. Don't let it control you. Do not become, and I'll use this word purposely, do not be enslaved by the past. Break those chains. Don't let the racism of the past destroy you in the present. Don't let the horrible things that happened in the past destroy you in the present. That's from an individual perspective and for the perspective of a race. Now, I'm not saying that helps. If you're an African American and you see this history, I can't even comprehend what that does to you. I don't even know how to process it. Now, for me, and maybe this is a difference, and this is something a white person sometimes, from my perspective, I don't see myself like I'm a part of the white race. I have no connection to what my race has done, will do, did do, what was done to it. I'm like, I just see myself as an individual. I don't see myself as a part of a racial, like, I don't see myself as a part of the white race or anything. I just see myself as an individual. But I can't comprehend if you're an African American, if you're black, knowing what has happened to your race in the history of the United States of America. I don't know if you may feel a connection to that I can't comprehend. Like, I don't see myself as a part, like, whatever happened to white people or what white people did, to me, it doesn't have anything to do with me. I'm an individual. I don't see myself as white. I see myself as a person. And so, but I think some people, what happened to their race, they feel it. Native Americans will speak of that. What happened to their people, they feel it. And I can't understand that. But all I can say is, you can't let it destroy you. You can't let it mess up your present. Now, look to fix the injustices in the present. No, I'm not denying that. But you can't let it destroy you. All right, I'll stop right there. Man, 1 hour and 7 minutes. And I didn't even scratch the surface here, but I wanted I'll end with this. Please allow this horrible history, be confronted with this horrible history, be confronted with the past, be confronted with the reality of the past, so that it will make you stop and look at yourself, ourselves, your church, my church, and the present. Email me your thoughts at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. Thank you. God bless.